Okay, you're listening to the award-winning here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Dr. Jeffrey Profiter, an expert regarding the economics of sports facilities. And Lance Haber will present an interview he conducted with activists interested in banning gas leaf blowers. Now, before we get to that, Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We have a little sad news to report at the top of the show. Donald L. Bartlett, half of the Bartlett and Steele investigative journalism team, passed away today. He was 88 years old and was a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner as an investigative reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He also reported for Time Magazine and Vanity Fair magazine. And if you haven't read work by Bartlett and Steele, you really should. Because this is what their work really looked at. And if I'm wrong here, Denise, correct me. This is how I always looked at it. That it's the kind of work that really stood up for the little guy and explained the things that were happening that maybe you didn't see.
You're right about that. I mean, America Went Wrong talked about a lot of things that at the time no one was talking about, and it did so it did so very thoroughly. I think that's kind of the thing that made it fascinating to everyone. It was very, very thorough in what it talked about, and the things that it showed you, because people weren't necessarily thinking about how how the economy was affecting various groups, and the means that it was using to affect various groups. And it was also, I remember about it is it was like one of the longest pieces I had ever read on anything. And because it took several pages of paper, and you can't really do that now.
Yeah.
And that's a shame that you can't, but you really can't do that now.
I always think that the best thing you can say about somebody is they helped people. And when you're looking at this body of work that both Mr. Butler and Mr. Steele produced throughout their careers, it helped people. It really put things into perspective for people. It really got a lot of ideas in the conversation. And I think that's probably always the best thing you can say about somebody. And I think that's the case here. So Donald L. Bartlett, 88 years old, one of the greats, one of the absolute greats. So we wanted to mention that at the top of the show. Our condolences to his friends and family and everybody who knew him. So,
because there were a lot of investigative reporters that probably wouldn't have thought about becoming investigative reporters or doing anything, like investigative reporting were it not for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tonight on the show, Denise, we're continuing our look at the potential arena site and the potential arena in Chinatown in here in Philadelphia. And tonight on the show, we're going to talk to Dr. Jeffrey Profiter, who is a professor at the University of Colorado. And he studies the economics of sports facilities and what happens when these are introduced in the communities. And I think what he has to say is really important to this conversation because it's somebody whose career is dedicated to studying this. So here is our interview with Dr. Jeffrey Profiter.
Give us a minute, Larry.
All right.
So, I am trying to download.
All right. So
ladies and gentlemen, to be honest, this is only my second time running the show.
Yeah, you're running the back end of the show, which is
I'm having a little bit of an issue, but we can bring on Lance Haber, who is going to talk to us about leaf blowers
All
and why
right.
they're bad.
All right. Let's bring on Lance Haver. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm fine. Thank you. It was very sad news. Those were two great reporters who just did unbelievable work at explaining the structure of our society and how, beginning with Reagan, it had just changed so dramatically to hurt the middle class and
Yeah.
to help the wealthy. So
Yep.
his work was great. He will be missed. And their work, Bartlett and Steele work, is really the foundation of looking at neoliberalism.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, and I agree with Denise. Still well worth reading. America, What Went Wrong, and its sequel, great books to help understand where we are.
Mm-hmm.
But on a much simpler note, I don't know how many people I have heard complain about gas-powered leaf blowers. They make noise, they smell bad, they interrupt the day. What many people don't know is it's not just the annoyance of the noise. It's much worse than that. And the other thing people don't know is they're completely not needed, that the technology of electric gas blowers has caught up, much like we can drive electric cars that go as fast as gas-powered cars. There are electric leaf blowers that blow as fast as regular leaf blowers. And we have a video, I think, that we're going to show. That's an interview with a group called Quiet, Clean Philly, which is advocating that Philadelphia follow in the footsteps of other cities in other counties and get two-stroke gas-powered leaf blowers illegal and set up a fund to help landscapers and others purchase the new electric leaf blowers. And if we have that video up and ready to go, there's one thing that's not in the interview that I just want to point out. When the city of Philadelphia got ready to ban smoking in restaurants, one of the arguments was it not just hurt consumers, but it hurt the workers in the restaurant and in the casinos who couldn't avoid it, who needed the jobs and couldn't avoid the secondhand smoke, should be protected in the workplace. Somehow, the same type of protections and the same type of concerns for the landscapers who use the gas-powered leaf blowers isn't there. Now, one could argue that it's because many of the landscapers are people who are struggling economically and are often people of color, that the same protection isn't being offered that would be offered in restaurants to waiters who make a significant amount more than the landscapers. But for whatever reason, that's not talked about. And the video will explain a little bit better than I have what's the issue and what people can do. So if we can get it up and running, that would be great.
See if we have that. And I'm not sure. Okay. Why don't we do this? Lance, do you have the video and you can put it in the present feature?
I do not have it. I think that it's
okay.
On
Why don't we do this then? What we're going to do instead is we will run our interview with Dr. Profiter, and then we'll come back and we'll do the interview you did, Lance. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Why don't we play that interview with Dr. Profiter talking about the economics of sports facilities? All right, Dr. Profiter, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
So can you tell us how you got interested in the economics of arenas?
Sure. I was a PhD student, early PhD student. Had to remember how long ago in the past was this. And just in the course of doing the PhD work where my all of my research was in public finance, particularly property taxes, sales taxes, local government debt, and things like that. I always loved sports. I grew up playing sports, and then I read a paper, and someone managed to merge these two ideas together and talk about just a broader research agenda that at that point in time was still sort of nascent and hadn't really been poked or filled a whole bunch, and then all these sort of policy questions that people had asked, but we didn't really have the data, or people didn't bring in.
Hall monitor this evening. Can you tell me who you are and why you want to talk with us?
Try to answer those data. So as a PhD student, I started playing around in the sandbox, and it turned out that I eventually learned that I could make a academic career on this, and people will pay me to do something that I would happily do for free. And here I am, 10, 15 years later.
Okay. So how does, generally speaking, an arena deal usually work? A major league team wants a new arena in the city. How does that usually happen?
So oftentimes, I guess you think about this if you already host a team, and that's going to be a slightly different process, at least initially, from I want to attract a team. Right? So if you take the scenario of I want to retain a team. So I already have one, but I want to retain it. Sometime during the current lease, and usually this is all anecdotal, somewhere in the 50% to 30% remaining on the lease, you start dropping hints. You start making these non-threat threats, as Neil deMause calls them. And those are these things like, in a few years, we're going to have to talk about renovations because our building's getting old, right? And you start having those conversations, or you look around the league and all these new facilities have these shiny whatever, and we need to have some of that. We're falling behind. This thing is now showing its age, right? That's another common sort of phrase. And so anyways, around that 50 to 30% left of the lease, you're starting to drop these nuggets. And then eventually you start putting in deadlines. You're like, we want to be in a new facility by X year. Now let's work backwards. How long does it take construction to do? So, and then before construction, we have pre-development and all these legal issues to wrangle out. And then we have negotiations. So you work backwards and you end up somewhere in the last 10 years of a lease. There's this urgency, and team owners will impose this urgency through their word usage, and other cities might come in and dangle incentives to try to attract them away, which will create, for the most part, another sense of urgency, but this time on the lawmaker side, to quote, get something done, right? To negotiate to keep them there. And that whole negotiation process can usually take up the last half to last third of whatever existing lease there is. So that's kind of like the timeline with threats and non-threats. It's not until you get to like the last couple years of a lease that if there's not a lot of movement, that's where sort of a big question mark happens, only because usually that's not how, like, it usually doesn't take that long. Right. Often these are done with 5 years or more to spare, on the existing lease, and you're not going to like the last year of a lease to actually make it happen. But if you do get to that point, either the team's already made up their mind what they're going to do. They're either going to leave or stay. And they will often sign what we call a bridge lease. And a bridge lease is just a short term, 3, 4, 5 years. Either you're going to do the bridge lease either because you plan on staying and you just need to finalize whatever it is that is already in the works, or you don't plan on staying and you just need 3 to 5 years to figure out where you're going to go.
So the situation here in Philadelphia, as you're well aware, is the 76ers want the new arena. They want to put it in the Chinatown area of the city. The owner says he's going to pay for it all himself. Is there maybe a comparable deal somewhere else in the country, example that we can point to that's similar to this? Is this unique? Is it unique for an owner to say, I'm going to cover all the costs myself?
No, it's not unique. It is, if you had to create like a pie chart, right? This would be like it would be a small sliver of deals that fall into this category, but it's not unique. And if we think of arenas that fit this, What comes to mind is Capital One Arena in DC is probably the closest. And that's not just because of the relationship to Chinatown, right? I mean, that's a well-known story how the arena came in and along with policy changes, zoning and whatnot, essentially decimated DC's Chinatown. But also on the ground lease part, right? That the ownership at the time of Poland had a ground lease arrangement with DC City, and then they turned around and they built their own arena. Other arenas that were similar would be at the time they were constructed anyways, Nationwide Arena, Target Center, at the time they were constructed, these were either fully private construction on a ground lease or just purely fully taxable. When I say fully taxable, I mean you are a privately constructed, privately developed facility on privately owned land. And the privately owned land part is important because that's often, in 98% of cases, that's the difference between paying full property taxes like you would any other commercial business owner, or paying zero property taxes or some heavily discounted property taxes. So the land ownership of these things matter. In the case of DC, they, as part of their negotiations to move from Maryland into DC, were able to secure a property tax exemption, a blanket property tax exemption, at least on real estate. They still pay personal property taxes. And in the case of like the Target Center and Nationwide Arena, what eventually happened with those is the cities turned around and bought the arenas from them. So they became, even though they started fully private, at least the construction part fully private, eventually, for one reason or another, and the reasons are slightly different between them, the cities ended up buying the facilities, making them public again, and then removing them from the tax roll. And this just actually happened with the Moda Center in Portland, where the city council just agreed to purchase the arena and some privately owned, team-owned land, a sliver of parcel, team-owned land. And this notion though of like paying it all yourself, if you think about your construction budget, when you go out and you like want to do something, you're not thinking about your construction budget in isolation of your operating budget, right? You're going to have to operate this thing, and that thing is going to cost you money, and property taxes are an operating cost. If your property taxes on your house go up, it's not like the bank turns around and says, oh, hey, I'll let you count your property taxes against your mortgage payments. I mean, that would be fantastic if they did, but that's essentially what team owners are able to get from city lawmakers and state lawmakers, where they basically will credit, lawmakers will agree to credit, in essence, property tax payments or lack thereof against, say, rent or anything like that. And so in this particular case, what that means is when you go to finance your arena, the Sixers might be paying for the arena, all the construction, but that's because part of that cost is being borne by taxpayers and the smaller property tax payment, right? Your property tax bill is lower, so you can buy more arena, right? And that's what's allowing the Sixers to spend $1.3 billion, for instance. If they had to pay the full property tax cost, like any other commercial business, would they spend $1.3 billion? No, economic theory and evidence tells us no, they wouldn't. If they were going to do that, then why are you giving them a property tax break, right? The property tax break is to induce behavior, at least in theory. It's supposed to induce behavior that you wouldn't have done otherwise. So that 1.3 billion is made possible because of a very generous property tax break, and that property tax break comes on the backs of taxpayers. Which is frankly just to say that when someone says, I'm financing this entirely by myself, I'm like, no, you're not. You're getting a huge property tax break. Plus, you're still going to you still need services, right? And so we don't know, for instance, what security or additional police is going to be needed for parking or for traffic management or security or anything like that. But who's going to pay that bill? An EMS response, who's going to pay that bill? You still need public services. How are you paying for them? And if you're not paying for them, then and or you're receiving a discount, then you're making all other taxpayers pay for them.
Mhm. So what you had talked about with some of the other arenas that were privately financed, it almost seemed like almost like a reverse kind of public purchasing of the arena or paying for the arena at the end, right? Is there a danger of that happening here?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell at this point. This is something that doesn't really happen until something goes wrong. So your question, the way I interpret your question is, what's the likelihood of something going wrong? And I mean, on the one hand, it's not like the Sixers owner is new to sports ownership, right? And that provides some degree of comfort and for reducing the risk that, quote, something would go wrong. But at the same time, there was public rumblings about, the team owner asking for an agreement that if any other team in Philadelphia received subsidies in the future, that they would have it too. And I'm not sure where that shows up or if it was still negotiated into. It's not in the ground lease. It probably would be in the arena lease, but that arena lease has not been released to the best of my knowledge. So is it possible that something in the future, let's suppose just for hypothetically, that condition remains in a final development document or in a final arena lease? If something goes wrong in the future and they want money, it's possible that part of that money could be delivered through the city buying the arena and therefore relieving the owner of this depreciating asset. And the thing that folks I think often forget is $1.3 billion up front now, right? Like the arena, the buildings on land depreciate, right? Once you build this thing, it turns into a giant paperweight of steel and concrete. And it needs a lot of love in order to maintain it, and not necessarily structurally, but to maintain it as an attraction to maximize your revenue. It needs an influx of capital over a long period of time. And 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to get tired of making those payments and upkeeping this facility, particularly when you see other team owners are getting new shiny buildings. And this is that keeping up with the Joneses that creates lots of problems. And frankly, lawmakers are doing it to themselves by participating in this world. So is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. Even if you build it privately now, that doesn't mean it remains private forever. Charlotte just went through this. They just agreed to $650 million for the Panther Stadium. Panther Stadium was built exactly like the Sixers are proposing, on a ground lease, fully privately constructed. And now, fast forward 25 years, they're getting $650 million in renovations because there was a threat that they were going to leave. So who knows, right? 20 years from now, my bet is, yeah, they're going to get hundreds of million dollars 20 years from now because they're going to hold the city hostage.
Now, it sounds like the analog for this is what happened in Washington, D.C. Are there any, and generally speaking, are there any tangible benefits when these arenas are built in a city?
So let's define tangible. So when I hear the word tangible, we meaning those of us who research this as part of our identities have a very specific meaning in mind. So let's just make that transparent. When I hear tangible, I'm thinking jobs, wages, tax revenue, and that, at least that's how people talk about them. The short answer is, for the most part, the net, and the net here is the important word. The net of tangible economic effects of these is relatively tiny. And when the difference between gross and net, right, the gross would be pretty large, but the net is, once you factor out any substitution effects where people are you have a fixed budget. Everyone has a fixed discretionary entertainment budget, right? It's not whatever that fixed amount is. You then look around your options in your city of where do I want to spend my dollar, my entertainment dollar. And at that point, it's a zero-sum game amongst all businesses, right? So as you create more entertainment options, you're really just redistributing who gets what fraction of your discretionary entertainment dollar. And that's the net economic effect of these, is to factor in that substitution. And so in the particular case of wages and in the particular case of jobs, right, most of the jobs that are being created directly by facilities are they're part-time, they're relatively low wage. And in this particular case, you're moving a team for what, 10 miles? And it's already in the city. So it's incredibly hard on the surface to say with a straight face, or to believe with a straight face, that this is going to induce any activity that isn't already happening in the city, because the Sixers are already there. The argument would have to be something like, hey, we built this big shiny new thing and it's going to attract people into Philadelphia that otherwise would stay out of Philadelphia. And how big of a number would that be? Well, sure, there might be some people who would be willing to pay a premium, the price ticket premiums, because as soon as you build this thing, ticket prices are going to skyrocket for the Sixers. And you're going to see a non-trivial amount of people in the first 3 years or so willing to spend that money to come see this shiny new object. At that point, it's no different than any other capital project that's shiny and new. But are they going to keep doing that? Are they going to all of a sudden become Sixers fans and come to every single Sixers game, or come to most Sixers games or multiple Sixers games just because it's a brand new facility and they weren't going to do this at Wells Fargo Center? It's incredibly unlikely. The other element here is this notion of tax revenue being sort of a benefit. And this is still very weird to me, right? Like, taxes aren't a benefit. Taxes are transfers, right? Taxes are a vehicle to transfer wealth from one person to another person, or one group to another group. They aren't a benefit, right? Only in the context of sports do people all of a sudden think taxes are a good thing, and that more taxes and raising taxes and increasing tax revenue is a good thing. And I'm still very confused by this. I do not have a reason why in all other policy contexts people want lower taxes, fewer taxes, less tax revenue going to the government, except in sports, where all of a sudden it's a benefit and it's a good thing. And we need to be excited that we're increasing tax revenue. But that's separate. So that's all in the tangible. The intangible portion, there is some non-trivial intangible benefit. The intangible benefits, civic pride, excited that the Sixers are there, and they've been doing well for the last 5, 6, 7 years in particular. And but that doesn't really apply in this case, because the Sixers aren't leaving, right? They're still in the city. And heck, even if they were in the metro, they could go to Camden and you would still have these benefits. It's not like people don't know Philadelphia exists just because they become the Camden Sixers, for instance. So I don't think those intangible benefits apply in this particular case. And the net tangible benefits, they're going to be tiny and fleeting.
I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Well, I guess my question for you, Doctor, and thank you for joining us, is if these things are so bad and there's so much evidence that shows that they're bad, why do we keep doing them?
Yeah, so I'm first resistant to framing them as bad, only because that's a judgment call. So me, as sort of the academic researcher, I'm not going to have an opinion on if someone thinks this is good for their community or not. So if folks believe it's bad, or voters believe it's bad or good, right? That's sort of up to them to decide. That's not up to me to decide for Philadelphia residents if it's good or bad. So that's just sort of a qualification. But the substance of your question is, why do people keep doing these things despite this overwhelming amount of evidence that it's suspect at best. And it can create a lot of distributional inequities, right? All public policies create winners and losers. Every time someone makes a policy choice, you are hurting someone and benefiting someone else. And that's distributional equity. So why, when we have these distributional components, and oftentimes the vast majority of time, if not exclusively, the wealthier are getting more wealthy and the poorer are getting less poor or more poor, or more harmed or carry more of the risk, why keep doing it? And we have some theories, and for the most part, they center around what economists call a sort of a public choice account to political behavior or to individual behavior. And that's essentially to think of politicians, the people who ultimately approve this, as having their own sort of political calculus. When they go and they make a decision, they're making a decision like for themselves, for their own individual benefits. And sometimes their individual benefits as politicians dovetail with the benefits of residents. Oftentimes it doesn't. And so if we think about, well, what are the benefits? What are the benefits to a lawmaker for approving these things? Well, they get to be in photo ops and they get to shake hands, and they might even get to have a dedicated public official suite at a game, right? Where they're catered to during playoff games or things like that. And you get to rub shoulders with rich and famous people, right? And then you think about like what the costs are. Okay, well, what's the political cost? If those are the political benefits, what's the political cost, right? And political cost, well, there'd have to be some type of meaningful threat that you're not going to be reelected, right? At least for those who aren't on term limit. Right? If you're not being term limited out, and your goal is to stay in power, then you need to have some type of electoral incentive or disincentive to vote for or vote against. What is the probability of someone being voted out of office because they approved a sports facility? And the answer to that is slim to none, because sports facilities aren't like capital punishment or euthanasia or abortion or other like highly emotionally charged policy issues that take up people's or that define people's identity. When they vote, right? When we think as individuals, okay, who am I as a person and what do I want reflected in policymaking? Oftentimes sports facilities aren't part of that, right? So if it's not part of the core values that each individual voter holds, then it's probably not going to be a deciding factor in who you vote for. Only the big issues are what dominate people's decision to vote, right? And so this is at a theoretical level. Why does he keep persisting? To the individual lawmaker, their political benefits far exceed their political cost. So until there's real teeth behind until there's real cost, real teeth to actually supporting these, nothing's ever going to change. Residents, the voters, would basically have to say, this issue is so important to me that I don't care how else you vote on anything else. I'm going to vote you out of office if you support this. And I just don't see that sports, even though it's billions of dollars, it just doesn't carry that same magnitude as other policy issues that occur throughout sort of the 4-year life cycle of a politician.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I personally have noticed about the 76th place to Serena and how it's kind of been put together, or the whole policy around it has been put together, is that there is a separation based on race. Right now, you have members of the Black community who have been promised economic development and different things from the Sixers. And on the other side, you have the Asian community in Chinatown that's saying, no, 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 don't do this, don't do this. Is this a common thing in projects like this? And I guess, what are the long-term consequences for places where this has happened? Is the rift permanent? And what happens with that?
That it's absolutely fantastic because this is one of these areas. There's a small group of sociologists who study sociology of sports and of urban places, and every now and then, and unfortunately, I still think there's far too few people studying this. But history of sports facilities, professional sports facilities, is unfortunately littered with similar instances. And so you asked a couple questions. Let me first give some sort of historical examples just to help put it in context. I'd mentioned before DC, but really we can go all the way back to Chavez Ravine and the Dodgers. And those I think are two fairly common one. But I think when the Philadelphia arena first started being discussed years ago, it immediately reminded me of Pittsburgh and the Hill District. And you had the Hill District had a very prominent Black community, lower income Black community, that in newspapers and lawmakers, which was white, would constantly frame this community and this neighborhood as blighted, right? And you go and you see the Black Run, and you read the newspapers of the Black Run newspaper and all the articles, and I'm like, that doesn't look blighted. That looks like a lively community to me. And yet it kept being called blighted and underutilized and run down, right? And so you had this very clear racial clash where the white lawmakers in power wanted to raise a large chunk of the Hill District in order to build what would become Mellon Arena, right, which would be the Pittsburgh Penguins' home. There's a wonderful dissertation by a sociologist, PhD student sociologist from about 10 years ago, that documents this incredible history of this neighborhood. We can also, with the Atlanta Hawks and Omni Coliseum in downtown Atlanta, this same sort of issue sort of played out. It wasn't with sort of decimating or raising a predominantly Black or Asian or any other sort of community. It just tussled in the racial politics component of it was focused on, okay, well, you're doing these policies to benefit one racial subgroup. What about everyone else? Are you going to spread the love, so to speak, right? So those sorts of debates, and they were often acrimonious. Those debates, they happen often in sports. And if we think about, like, where a sports facility placed, like last time I checked, we don't put sports facilities in rich neighborhoods, right? They're not. And so simply in virtue of where lawmakers agree to put facilities, where they agree to entertain sites, it's going to create these racial tensions. And when I see the Philadelphia 76ers case, like, I can't help but think, 50 years ago in Pittsburgh, we saw something similar to this, except it was not the Black community, quote, versus the Asian community. And I don't really like that setup, even though it appears that way. It appears that that's what's going on, at least at a policy level. But similar in Pittsburgh, it was kind of like that, where you had white policymakers outside the neighborhood versus the predominantly Black the Black neighborhood, and trying to resist this policy that this is our neighborhood. Why are you coming in and trying to destroy it? And so those are the sort of some historical antecedents of this, and there are many others with a little bit of research. Folks can find that. But then you ask this question: how long does this last? And is this like a permanent sort of, is this a way to improve or hurt race or class or socioeconomic relationships over time? And we don't have data. As far as I know, we don't have longitudinal or historical data on that, because you'd have to measure people's attitudes towards different races, right? There's some historical precedents at a much larger level, right? We know, for instance, that there are still older generation Korean and Chinese residents in both China and Korea who are very reluctant to support Japan, right? Because of what happened during World War II. So is it plausible that people will hold on to anger and accuse other people in other groups for what they see as harming their community? Absolutely. If I were a betting man, I would not say that this is going to improve relationships among these groups. But like as a policymaker, you as the lawmaker have to see that and know that and make your decision, incorporate that into your decision. Like, what type of community are you trying to encourage, or do you want to encourage? Is it one where there's more division or not?
Okay. Now, fans probably don't play into this as much as they should, because I personally, as a Sixers fan, believe that after the way they stunk up the Boston Garden in 2023 on Game 7 on Mother's Day, yes, I'm still angry about this, for them to then turn around and have the unmitigated gall to ask a city whose Mother's Day you basically ruined to give you a new downtown stadium. It's just like galling to me. I mean, I just can't believe they're doing this. But what part do fans play in all this? And I ask because depending on which fans you talk to, you either have the fans who are like, yeah, I want a downtown stadium, it makes sense. And then you have the fans who want to keep the stadiums all where they are. And having lived in the neighborhood where the stadiums are, we're not real fond of that either. So what part can fans play in all of this?
I mean, I like, as far as I love your story, because it reminds me, I'm a Sacramento Kings fan, and I have been for the vast majority of my life, and I can still think of Western Conference Finals with the Lakers, and how many times the Kings were so close to going to the finals in those early 2000s, and it was Big Shot Bob making a three-pointer at the end of a game to kill it for us, Samaki Walker doing something silly. Yeah, so those memories, those sticky memories, I appreciate that, because it's the exact same experience that I have. And what's interesting about the Sacramento case and the Philly case, that's also a nice parallel here, besides our angst and anecdotes, is before the Kings were in their current arena, Golden One Center, which is in downtown Sacramento, they were in Arco Arena. It went by a bunch of names, but we'll always call it Arco Arena. And it was basically what's going on with Wells Fargo Center and that sports complex, where it's just surrounded by parking lots, right? It's kind of like out in the middle of, I mean, South Philly is not middle of nowhere. It was, for Sacramento, it's more or less out in the middle of nowhere, and it's surrounded by parking lots. And there is a competing economic arguments for these integrated facilities in built up space versus isolated facilities. And one of my economic opinions is we should not be integrating these into downtown areas, right? And that's both me as a fan, I don't want a downtown facility. As the policy analyst who studies these things, I don't want a downtown facility. I want the isolated facility, right? And so when I think of what is the best possible example of how these things should be built as a fan and as a policy analyst, it's Richfield Coliseum. And of course, no one liked Richfield Coliseum because it was out in the middle of literally nowhere, and you had to drive 40 minutes just to get there. But that's the point. It's out in the middle of nowhere, which means it's not going to disturb anyone, right? So sports facilities create both positive spillover effects, what we call positive externalities, and negative externalities. Okay? So when you're a fan and you're advocating for the location of a facility, for instance, if you don't think about negative externalities, then you're going to reach probably a different decision than if you do think about these negative externalities. And we'll give the example of traffic, right? So ingress and egress to downtown Philly, notwithstanding the train, is not going to be fun. On game days, even with the train, even if you're running extra trains, because this happens all the time in New York with the Yankees and Mets games, even if you're running extra trains, it's gross. Like you sticking yourself into a shuttle car, crammed, and you've got maybe people in bad moods because maybe the team lost. And yeah, so that entire experience of trying to get in and out of downtown when 16,000 people, 18,000 people are trying to leave all at the same time is frankly not fun. At least in the complex, when you're trying to leave, you're in the comfort of your own car, right? Or a lift or something like that. And that insulates you from some of the sort of negative externalities of, say, people being drunk or their bad moods or they're cursing or they're smoking or anything like that, that might like otherwise negatively affect your experience. And so in the case of traffic, you might still have that type of congestion, but ingress and egress is easier. In the case of the complex, there's more land and space to improve ingress and egress than you're going to have at the downtown arena. If you want better ingress and egress downtown, someone's going to have to pay for it. And it's probably not going to be the Sixers, which again, we get back to this question of, hey, I'm paying for the whole thing. Well, no, not really. You still need a whole lot of infrastructure to support it. And that infrastructure is going to cost taxpayers money.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, our co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
The sports moment that sticks in my head and will forever is the 2011 Phillies losing the first round of the playoffs to the St. Louis Cardinals. And at the last at bat, Ryan Howard tore his Achilles, and that was the end of that era of Phillies baseball. So I just had to throw that out there. Well, Dr. Jeffrey Profiter, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to do so.
All right. And I still remember that 2011 Phillies team, and I'm hoping that this year is not a repeat of that, although I've been told the Phillies are up by 1 at last count. So that's good. So now I'd like to bring back Lance Haver on the show.
Hi, that was really fascinating. It was really nice to hear from an economist talking about what the stadium would mean and what it wouldn't mean. And I hope people were able to follow all of the discussion. But again, it's always interesting to hear just how bad the lies are, right? The Sixers are going to pay for everything with the exception of the land.
Yeah.
And the taxes and
Yeah.
the other costs.
Mm-hmm.
So one day we'll get a government that tells us the truth.
Yeah.
And that will be nice. But to focus on a much simpler solution, and that is the pollution and the noise pollution and the danger to the workers from gasoline-powered leaf blowers, I'd like to play the interview with Quiet Clean Philadelphia and talk a little bit at the end about what people can do who'd like to see the switch to electric leaf blowers for the workers' benefit, for the neighborhood's benefit, for the environment's benefit, and for all of our benefit. So if we could play that.
Sure. My name is Seth Lieberman and
Georgette Bartel.
And we are both members of the core steering team of Quiet Clean Philly. And Quiet Clean Philly's mission is to phase out the use of probably the dirtiest engines allowed under law, to phase out the use of gas leaf blowers within the city of Philadelphia.
And why are they a problem?
Core issues. One stems from their emissions. The second is from their noise. And then the third one related to the emissions are the environmental footprint. But in terms of the emissions, I don't want to get too geeky on you, but the gas leaf blower is powered by what's called a two-stroke engine, which means you pour in gas and oil together and it kind of burns. And when you pass a gas leaf blower and you smell that sort of sweet, acrid smell, that's about 30% of his unburned oil particulates. So what do we know about these emissions that come out? The first thing we know is that the EPA says they're major contributors to asthma, high blood pressure, and cancers of various kinds. They have all kinds of toxic chemicals, including butadiene. And so why should we care about this? The first reason we should care is because of the workers who are actually carrying these machines on their backs. I just had a conversation with Councilman Harity, and he was basically saying, what are the rights of a worker who's got to burn these things? We know the EPA says we're exposing them to lung cancer, et cetera. So those emissions, they're affecting the workers. They're also affecting the communities that they're used in. And this is not just the leafy parts of Philadelphia. Under Mayor Parker's Clean and Green initiative, there's an effort to clean every block within the city of Philadelphia. And what's the technology used to clean those blocks? Gas leaf blowers. I mean, we live in a city where over 1 in 5 kids have asthma, and we are blowing these emissions in there. So that's one reason why we care. The second reason we care is the noise. Some people think, oh, noise, it's annoying, and we all have to deal with annoyances, but we know that noise causes all kinds of problems. It raises blood pressure. It affects people's hearing. For many people who are shift workers and they're trying to sleep during the day, or people who are working from home, it actually gets in the way of their sleep, of their productivity, et cetera. The third reason why we should care has to do with the environmental footprint. As I said, James Fallows of The Atlantic said the gas leaf blower is the dirtiest engine allowed by law. We know that, and this is a study done by the car analysis company Edmunds, and we know that what they did is they hooked up a simple gas leaf blower to one of those smog machines that they use to measure smog and to say whether a car is okay to use. What they found is that the emissions of 30 minutes of a classic gas leaf blower 2-stroke engine are as bad as driving a Ford Raptor pickup truck from the city of Philadelphia, and get this, this is just 30 minutes all the way to Juneau, Alaska.
Thank you. Georgette, is it a problem in your neighborhood?
Yeah, actually, we live right next to an apartment building, and they have a company that comes and does all of their work, and they have leaf blowers, and it's not just one, which is already very annoying because of the high decibel levels, which of course everybody can hear, but they'll have 3 or 4 working at once. And I think for lots of people, when you hear that much, it goes a long distance, much farther than the amount of feet that an electric leaf blower that you can hear. Plus, because it's a low register, it goes through walls and it goes through windows. So that low register really reverberates inside people. It's so annoying. And when you read Nextdoor and all these places, what do people complain of? It's the noise. It's terrible. So that is one thing. And it's also the school across the street. So that is a big problem.
Would it be fair to say that many of the problems in the city are very difficult to solve, but that this one is a simple solution?
Well, Georgette, you're shaking your head. Say more.
Well, it's the power. The power is the issue. And electric blowers are getting better and better. I mean, every time I go online, I see an electric blower that has more power. And they are expensive. I mean, there is a transition period that is difficult. And if you have a big company, you will have to be putting out thousands of dollars for new equipment. And, if you look at Montgomery County in Maryland, and you look at places where they've done it, or in Portland, Oregon, that they will have a transition fund, where they can give grants and help people make that transition. So there's a lot of solutions, but there has to be this transition of the government chipping in to help landscapers and even small landscapers make that transition.
So I want to add to that, which is I believe that while politically it may not be that simple, but I believe that there's probably no easier way to impact community health, worker health, and the environment than making the transition. It's not hard to do technologically.
It would go a lot faster if we knew that we had some commitment from the government to help these people, or from somebody, maybe from one of these owners of these companies that make the electric leaf blowers. Somehow or other, we have to make it easier for people to make that transition.
How do our viewers and our listeners who want to know more about what you're doing get in touch with you? What's your webpage?
Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with us, is just to go to quietcleanphilly.org. That's quietcleanphilly.org. And you'll find a petition you can sign and join 1,000 Philadelphia residents signing it. And there's links to all of our articles and radio and TV, as well as other facts about the transition.
So I think that's pretty clear. Issues of poverty, issues about drug addiction, issues about equitable taxes are all complicated issues where there's not really an easy solution. But here we've just heard one of the largest environmental problems in the city is the two-stroke gas-powered leaf blowers. The new electric blowers are just as powerful, just as good. Anyone who doubts that can go to Consumer Reports, which is a nonprofit, accepts no money from any advertisers. Just look at their reports on the leaf blowers, and they'll actually say that the electric leaf blowers are better than the gas-powered ones. And the stumbling block is the city setting up a fund to help the new landscapers make the transition. And while the city has plenty of money, obviously, to buy land for the Sixers, which maybe or maybe not has some benefit for regular people, the city's not willing to spend, or has yet to spend, the money that will help people who are bothered by the air pollution, who struggle with asthma, who are sick and tired of having their days disrupted by the noise, set up a very modest amount of money to help the landscapers switch over from the polluting ones to the clean ones.
Well, it's funny because it's not something I had thought about a whole lot before we discussed it on the show here. And I see the point and I see the logic to it. There isn't much of a necessity here for this. And if anything, it's causing more problems. Again, something that we maybe don't know a whole lot about.
Right. It's like that old joke, why do you cut off the end of the ham before you make it? And it's like, I don't know. That's how my mother taught me. Mom, why did you do it? I don't know. That's how my grandma did it. And she said, Grandma, why did you cut off the end of the ham before you cooked? And she said, well, in those days, we didn't have a pot big enough to put the ham in. So, yeah, we used the gas power leaf blowers for many years because truth is the electric ones didn't work as well. But Tesla, EVs, all the technology has caught up and we don't need them anymore. And now it's just inertia. And it's inertia from government to say, we're going to mandate that cars get more gas miles. We're going to stop smoking in restaurants and in bars. But we're going to turn a blind eye to landscapers. And I think we should once again just point out who are the landscapers for the most part in the city of Philadelphia. They are, for the most part, first-generation immigrants, people who are struggling, doing a tremendous amount of work under trying conditions, and they don't necessarily have a political voice in the same way that other workers do. They're not unionized. It's not like there's a restaurant workers union or a casino workers union. There's no organization for the guys and women walking around with these polluting backpacks on their backs, breathing in this smoke every day. Now, the city does have a noise ordinance, by the way. It requires all of the leaf blowers to be in good operating condition and have noise reduction. But as we know, the city never enforces that.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Lance, thank you so much. Next week on the show, no Arena Gaberhood will be on to discuss what's going on there with the arena. We'd like to thank Dr. Jeffrey Profiter, and we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.